In this video, I'm going to cover the variables that you are going to face when reading an academic research article. But first, what is a variable? A variable can be an attribute, or it can be a characteristic of something. It can be the characteristic of people, of things, or of a phenomenon. Variables can also be attributes. What is an attribute? It could be a feature of a thing that you are interested in. And the name of variables suggests that they can vary. I mean, they can change. Some can be high, some can be low. For example, temperature is a variable. In medical science, human body temperature is an important variable. But in environmental research, maybe ground temperature, air temperature would be very important variables as well. So, in a research, the researcher have to manipulate or observe or measure the variables. And then for the data collected, they will have to further process it. They may have to distill from those data useful information so that they can answer their research question, or they can prove or disapprove their research hypothesis. The two main types of variables that we face are called independent variables and dependent variables. Independent and dependent. In fact, they have a whole lot of names. For example, independent variables are often called predictive variable, exogenous variable, experimental variable, explanatory variable, or they could be simply called covariate or regressor. And I want to specifically mention this term, exogenous variable. This word exogenous means outside, out of the system, out there. So, when you are conducting a research, you view those variables as factors in a system. Some changes in some factors will affect the changes in other factors. And the change happened because of there are changes outside the system. So we call the variables that initiating those changes exogenous. In fact, in the statistical modeling, they tend to call independent variables exogenous variables. And then independent variables will control the behavior of another set of variables that is called dependent variables. The way that independent changed the independent variable changed dependent variables is just like as you push something, or maybe if you push a person and that person will fall down. The push, the action of pushing, is the change in independent variable, and the falling down of the person is the outcome, so that is the dependence variable. That is sometimes called response variable, endogenous variable, or outcome variable. In many research, they want to predict how dependence variables change in response to a change in independence variables. Let's say if the independence variable increased by 10%, how many percent will the dependent variable increase or decrease? That is the theme of research. You can think about what independent variables and dependent variables you want to include in your own research as you write the research question, research objective, and research hypothesis. I give you an example here. There are two axes in this graph. Here, the horizontal axis is called x-axis, and here, the vertical axis is called the y-axis. You can see that for the red line, when x increases from 50 to 100 to 150 to 200 and so on, y increases as well from 50 to 75 to 100 and so on. In this way, we can say that we observe a change in y as x changes. Let's say x is the independent variable and y is the dependent variable. So the independence variable causes a change in the dependence variable. I'm saying causes because I assume x controls y. Is that so? Always? May not be always. But let's simplify things for a bit at the moment. And as x increases, y increases too. We can say that um, the x-axis describes the independence variables, whereas the y-axis describes the dependence variable. And it is also true that in many research, those researchers, when plotting graphs, they will put the independence variable on the x-axis, but they will place the dependence variable on the y-axis. I think that is an academic convention or a tradition to do so. Now, you see that there are three variables introduced here. I call them independent variable, dependence variable, and controlled variable. I will use a planting experiment as an example. In this experiment, I want to measure the effect of irrigation on plant growth. So, the independence variable would be the amount of irrigation or the amount of water that I use for irrigation. This is the independence variable. I may think that if I put more water into the pot, and then the plant will grow taller and it will grow faster and it will grow stronger. Is it so? I measure this phenomenon by a ruler. Maybe I just use one bottle of water for irrigation in set A, but I use 3 bottles of water for irrigation in set B. So the independence variable in this case is the amount of irrigation water. And what is the dependent variable? Originally, I said that I want to measure plant growth. But plant growth is an abstract concept. It cannot be seen directly. It cannot be sensed directly. So we have to use some quantities or some indices to quantify plant growth, to make this abstract thing become a number or an objective number. To make it objective, I used a ruler to measure plant height. So this ruler has a scale and the scale tells me how tall the plants are, and that is the dependence variable. Why dependent? Because the plant height depends on the amount of irrigation water as laid out in my research hypothesis. So now we are going to start our research. But is it all? Did we do enough control measures? And you may ask me, what is control? In fact, you notice that plant growth is not just controlled or governed by water, by irrigation. Different types of plants have different response to irrigation. Some plants can grow faster with more water, but some plants may not like too much water. Also, there are other factors as well. How large is the pot? What is the soil inside the pot? And these things should be the same across set A and set B. I need to control for them so that they do not uh, they do not enter they do not enter the scene, and they do not disturb my research findings. Therefore, for the pot and the soil within and the plant species, these three variables will be the same for both set A and set B. If I use maybe different soil between set A and set B, the effect of soil will be influencing the effect of irrigation water. I don't want that to happen. So I use the same amount of soil, I use the same soil type for set A and set B. That is the way I control for my experiment. I control those variables that are not of my research interest. I'm totally not interested in other factors. I'm only interested in irrigation water as the independence variable. Then let's go to some realistic examples. How to quickly identify the variables. Remember this article? This is the article that we have just dealt with in our last video. In the last video, we have identified the aim of the research, and we have extract the implicit research hypothesis from the aim. But now we want to do something more. We want to identify the independence variable and the dependence variable. I use a red line to highlight the independence variable. What is the independence variable? It's simple. You see that this researcher highlighted there are 3 green plots and a reference bitumen's flat roof. The independence variable is very simple. It is the roof type. Roof type means maybe bare roof or green roof. And why is roof type a independence variable? It is because difference in this factor will affect the dependence variable. What are the dependence variable? Also very simple. It will be the mean value and standard deviation of the temperature or the thermal behavior. You may have learned these two terms, mean value and standard deviation, from statistics. And then in this research, those researchers are trying to do research based on mean value and standard deviation, they are both very useful. And I want you to pay attention to temperature. The researchers are measuring the mean value and standard deviation of the temperatures on the roof. So they want to compare when the roof changes, will there be changes in the temperature too? They want to answer this question. And here's very specifically, the researcher mentioned there are 3 green plots. What are the 3 green plots? Here, you see that there are 3 plots, namely plot 1, plot 2, and plot 3. What is the difference? There are different layers. You can see here, plot 3 has an insulation layer. But are there any in plot 1 and plot 2? No. Also, you can see that there are differences in the composition of the layers or the thickness. You can see here, plot 1 has a protection layer of 3 mm thick, but plot 2 it is 7 mm. Also, you can see that for the roof barrier waterproof layer, both plot 1 and plot 2 are 4 mm thick, but for plot 3 it is just 2 mm thick. Therefore, we can say that the layer composition and the layer thickness may be the independence variables as well. So, in this research, I can write down the layer composition and layer thickness are the independence variables. But the mean value of temperature and the standard deviation of the temperature are the dependence variables. The overall idea is like this. The researcher changes the independence variable based on their view. They may construct some green roof test cells, that is simulated green roofs, with different layer composition. And each layer may be having different thickness for those different plots. As they changed the independence variable, that change will have an effect on the dependence variable. The temperature measured on the roof, like the surface temperature, the soil temperature, or the air temperature, may be different among the 3 green roofs plots. There will also be differences between bare roof and green roofs. And the bare versus green roof difference may change because of the change in layer composition and layer thickness. That is what the whole research is about. Next, we go to the second study we have just tackled. Just now, we have identified the research aim of this study. It is similar, which is to examine the effect of an IGR, intensive green roof, on the roof level microclimate by comparing temperature and radiation parameters against a reference bare roof in subtropical winter. So, is this familiar to you? I think so. But I want you to pay attention to the sentence below. You can see that I underlined 3 phrases. And actually, they are the independence variable. Why are they independence variable? Let me show you. It is because as there are changes in roof type, for example, if you grow vegetation on a roof, it changes from bare roof to green roof. Or if you record the temperature measurement in different weather scenarios like sunny, cloudy, or rainy days, or you measure those temperature during daytime or nighttime, you will see that um, the dependence variables will change. And what are the dependence variables? It is laid out here. Temperature and radiation. So this whole study is about the effect of roof type, weather scenarios, and time of the day on temperature and radiation. For example, I may say that if I change a bare roof to a green roof, will the temperature measured on the roof change? Will the vegetation like grass, herbs, or trees block the radiation and cool down the temperature? Or I may ask that um, will the temperature be different in various weather scenarios? If I observe the temperature in sunny weather, will it be hotter than in cloudy weather? Also, I may uh, measure the temperature from day to night and compare them. And there could be a research hypothesis as well. The daytime temperature is warmer than the nighttime temperature. Is it so? So these are the independence variables or the factors affecting the dependence variables, temperature and radiation. It's like this. The independence variables are having some effects on the dependence variable. Any changes in roof type, weather, or time of the day will change the dependent variable. And my job as a researcher is to find out, is that change statistically significant? Let's say if I change the roof type from bare roof to green roof, and then I observe a drop in temperature, maybe by 20 degrees, then that would be amazing. But if I choose to measure the temperature in sunny and cloudy weather, and I find that no matter it is sunny or cloudy, the temperature stays the same. That means the independence variable weather is not having a significant effect on temperature. So the magnitude of the change in the dependence variable relative to the change in independence variable will be of research interest. So what should you do? I suggest that you should identify the variables when you receive an academic research paper. After receiving an academic research paper, you should highlight the aim. You should find the research hypothesis. And in the research hypothesis, I think you are able to locate the variables that the researchers are looking at. And then ask yourself, are they comprehensive? So are those variables enough to explain the change in the dependence variables? And are you interested in them? So if you are a phytologist, you want to measure plant growth, and you are very interested in measuring plant performance. Just say you may measure the plant height of 100 or 200 pots of plants, and you can still continue. But if you think that that is boring, then you better move on to the next research topic. And also, you have to ask yourself, do you know how to measure those independence variables and dependence variables? Because if you know how to measure them, that would be very, very beneficial to your research. Why? because you do not have to study over about the methods of the measurements of the variables. And then you have to ask yourself, are there confounders? What are confounders? Let me show you with an example. This is the planting experiment I have told you previously. And in set A and set B, I use different amount of irrigation water. But I put these two pots at two different locations. The location of set B is exposed to strong sunlight. The sunshine is so strong that it encourages plant growth. However, for plant A, there is simply not enough sunlight. And then at the end of the research, I would say that if I irrigate more, then the plant will grow stronger and faster. Is this experiment fair? Is this experiment objective? Of course not. Why? It is because the sun helped plant growth in set B, but not set A. I need to put sunshine as a controlled variable as well. So that is a possible way if you want to evaluate or you want to critically review a study. And I want you to do so. Why? Because I want you to improve your study design. I want you to improve your research. That is the way of approximating the factors that are pertinent to the research question that you want to answer. And that is the end of this video. Thank you.